Hello to all in this class. We are now in the fifth week of our class, and the reading for this week is Charles Long's Perspectives for the Study of African American Religion in the United States. Um, I promise this will be a short presentation, but one I just want to highlight some things that Charles Long lifts up. But in no way is this an excuse for you not to read uh, the chapter because again there will be a discussion board question posted from this particular reading. The first thing that Charles Long indicates, well, there are three things, actually, three interrelated things that he talks about in trying to give us an understanding of how to go about studying uh, African American religion. Those three things are that number one, Africa as a historical reality and really as a symbol or a trope for understanding who we are. What he means by that is that, for the most part, most people of African descent who are here in America, they are from Africa. We can't get around that. We can't get by that. No matter how some people may feel about Africa as a continent. I recall sometime back, I went to a general conference of the African Methodist Episcopal Church, in which I am an itinerant elder. And at that general conference, it was the first time that an African was elected a bishop on the first ballot. Now, we have had another African elected as a bishop, but this was the first time that an African was elected a bishop on the first ballot. And for those of you who are AME and you're familiar with that denomination, you know how that process goes. And I was an observer at this particular general conference, and when this African was elected, some people from his home country were there, and they began to dance and shout all over the stage, and as I guess you might say, as only Africans can. And there was this lady sitting in front of me, and she made the statement, "Why are those Africans acting like that?" And I politely leaned over and whispered to her, "You're an African." To which she said, "I am not an African. I'm from South Carolina." And I give this story to indicate just how negative Africa is viewed by a lot of African Americans. But we cannot get beyond that very reality that if you have a certain skin pigmentation, you hail from the continent. And that is an important image also in terms of how we go about religion. Whether you are Christian, Muslim, Black Hebrew, Hebrew Israelite, um, there is this notion that we must deal with Africa as a trope. We can't get beyond it. One of the discussions that they get involved in is the matter of African retentions in our religion, and the debate about whether, especially with Christianity, are there any elements of Africa left in what we do? And I'm not trying to solve that debate here. I'm not even going to weigh in on the debate right now. But what Charles Long does is say that we must take Africa seriously in talking about African American religion. The second interrelated thing he talks about is our involuntary presence here in America. Now, I know there may have been some Africans prior to 1619 who may have come to this country, but for the most part, um, our presence here resulted from the enslavement of Africans from the continent. Um, and that did something to us psychologically, religiously, theologically. It made us consider just who we were as as a people. And by that I mean, how do we deal with our religious aspects? How do we deal with our religious imagery? Considering that the gods we had, or our ancestors had, were taken from us, um, especially here in the United States. There's more of Africa in the religions in South and Central America, but here in the United States, how do we deal with the notion that we were stripped of those deities, and made to, if not worship, but made to acknowledge a singular European deity? And what were the responses to that? Again, there have been a lot of theological debates, a lot of religious debates, a lot of historical debates about exactly how blacks responding to their involuntary presence here. And I'm not trying to rehash those debates, but I just want to make sure that we truly understand. Um, Whereas a lot of people came to this country voluntarily, and when they got here, there was no element of subjugation, no elements of being in prison. Um, our ancestors were the only ones who were brought here as enslaved people on a permanent basis. So how does that impact who we are as a religious people or a spiritual people? How do we deal with that? And this then leads into this third element that Charles Long brings up: the who is God really? What is this symbol of God that we have to deal with? I know that most of you are Christian. I'm Christian. And I know that most of you have been taught to talk about God in a certain way, to understand God in a certain way. But when it comes right down to it, the question to make can seriously be asked: is the God of African Americans the same as the God of the oppressors? And this is one of the real deals that we had to deal with in understanding who God was. Even when the enslavers were telling us one thing about God, that was not the reality of our ancestors. Even if we use the same language as the oppressors, our understanding of the deity was vastly different. And we can see this across religious lines. Again, primarily, I know we talk about Christianity, but we can see it with black Muslims. We can see it with the Hebrew Israelites. We can see it with black Jews. We can see it with anyone who has a pigmentation darker than white that talk about God in a vastly different kind of way. And Charles Long does a very good job of bringing these ideas to the fore. Now he's looking at it from a historical perspective, looking at the history of religion, how people talk about who they are in relation to something other than themselves, the mysterium tremendum. So how do we go about dealing with that? And this is just another element of us dealing with the notion of black religion in America. It's not just limited to Christianity, but it looks at the overall overarching perspective of being black, which means that we must deal with Africa, which means we must deal with our involuntary presence here, which means we must deal with our changing symbology of the deity. How do we go about bringing these things together and talking about black religion in America? So I just want to make sure that we understood that, and as I promised, I don't want to make this too long, so I'm going to end this here, so that we can move forward. As you can see from your syllabus, um, next week I'm going to be posting a a video on Oyotunji Village. Some of you may have heard about that. Um, and many of you may not have, but I will be posting that video next week, and we'll talk about that some more. And then we're going to begin moving into the pen chapters, which are of course posted in course documents. If you have not started reading some of those chapters yet, I do encourage you to do so, because once we get into those, we will be having those weekly chapter analyses. All right. That